back to another episode of Now Showing with
Jon
and Cam. And on today's episode, we are doing another countdown for you guys. And in time for the treat of Halloween season, we are going to be doing our top 5 vampire movies for you guys. And this is a hard list to make because there's a lot of great vampire movies that are out there from decade to decade. Vampire movies seem to always find their way out, whether it be to the big screen or the small screen. And I can't wait to see this guy's list because this is a topic we haven't talked a lot about in terms of what our favorite vampire movies are. So I'm very curious to see, because of course we don't share each other's list, and we're very curious to see what you guys have in the comments as well as your top 5 vampire movies. So I'm going to let Jon start it off. He's going to give you his number 5 vampire movie or best vampire movie of all time, and then I'll follow right after.
Alright, so my number 5 stars James Woods. That might be a giveaway right there. And that's going to be John Carpenter's Vampires. That came out in 1998. Remember that year, because it's going to come back again. That was a big year for vampire movies, for this guy at least. So basically, this is just a bloody good movie. Basic quick synopsis. James Woods' character, he is basically a vampire hunter. He gets sent in, his entire team basically gets killed, so he basically is going for revenge. Also enter the Catholic Church, and a relic, and basically the Blade Syndrome. The vampires basically want this Catholic relic because if they get it, the sun no longer matters, and they can basically walk during the daylight and wreak all kinds of havoc. So it's basically him getting revenge and stopping the vampire apocalypse. And from the beginning to the end, it's just your... So when it comes to vampire movies, I like a lot of gore, a lot of over-the-top bloodiness, and this gives that to you. I also like a good story, but this one, the story isn't bad. It's more the effects, the action that really grabs me. So yeah, my number 5, John Carpenter's Vampires.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned this movie because in putting together this list, that one was on my countdown at one point, and I moved it out last second. So I'm glad you mentioned it because that is one of the favorites from mine. It just missed the top 5. But that's an awesome vampire movie. Great effects, like Jon said. Definitely check out John Carpenter's Vampires. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so my number 5 is a film that came out in 2010. It did not come to theaters. It was a straight-to-DVD film. Picked it up, not knowing one single thing about it, watched it, and within 2 days I rewatched it again because I liked it that much, and I've watched it a handful of times since. And that movie is Stakeland. Stakeland is, honestly... it's one of the best vampire movies of all time. That's why it's in my top 5. And if you've never seen it, I would recommend doing so right away. It even spawned a sequel. That's how much of a following it picked up, just being a straight-to-DVD film, that it spawned a sequel because of the fan outreach of wanting to see more. The sequel's done very well as well, but not quite as good as the first one. If you've never seen Stakeland, which many of you may have not, it is basically a world that has become overrun by vampires, but these aren't your typical vampires. These are vampires that also have a lot of zombie-like traits. They don't just crave blood, but they will rip you apart, and also they never have a human form. They are stuck in the vampire form in which they almost look zombie or creature-like, just with the giant fangs. And they are even more destructive at night than they are during the day. And in the film, there's a teenage boy named Martin who, after watching his family brutally murdered by these vampires and basically about to be killed himself, he is saved by this mysterious guy who goes by the name Mister, who basically kills these vampires and decides to take Martin along with him, or I should say Martin sort of places himself along with Mister, and along the way they travel across the country trying to find some ounce of freedom, some ounce of being saved in this world. And the world is completely ravaged by these vampires. There aren't many people left. And even in this world, currency is used with vampire teeth. When you kill vampires, you take their fangs to show that you are a skilled fighter, and you can trade in vampire fangs to get things like food, water, drinks, things like that. And not only are there vampires in this world, but there are these sadistic cults that believe that they have to do evil things because this is the end of the world. So you have to worry about these people as well. The effects in this movie are fantastic. The acting is top notch. And I can almost guarantee if you watch Stakeland, it will become one of your favorite vampire movies. I've yet to hear from someone who didn't like it. So if you haven't checked it out, watch it. Stakeland.
Definitely agree there. It didn't make my list, but it was one that was kind of being tossed around. So I had said, remember the date, actually the year 1998. My number 4 also came out in 1998. And also has to do with a vampire and being in daylight, and that's Blade. I mean, what more can I say about Blade other than it's near perfection? I mean, you're taking vampires and horror and Marvel Comics, and you're combining the two. I mean, for me, that's perfection right there.
Yeah.
The story, everything about Blade basically is a hybrid human vampire that can walk, that isn't affected by the same things as typical vampires. He does still thirst for blood, but he finds a way to handle that, and it's basically him trying to hunt down every last possible vampire. And he goes up against Deacon Frost in the first one, which to me is one of the greatest characters in a vampire movie, played by Stephen Dorff. And let me just tell you, like, his acting in this, his character is incredible.
Yeah.
And you take Wesley Snipes as Blade, it's just a perfect movie. Once again, like I said before, a lot of the vampire movies, I like a lot of action with my vampire movies. There's a couple that are more based on the actual story, but yeah, number 4, Blade.
Awesome pick. Yeah, the Blade series is awesome. Wesley Snipes, I think that was perfect casting. I don't really, it's hard to picture anyone else as Blade.
Supposedly we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. There's definitely talk. So, my number 4 is a film from 1987, and this is not considered specifically a vampire movie because it features a whole cast of monsters, but the vampire happens to be the lead monster in this and has the most screen time. So I had to put it on this list, and I do consider it, of course, partially to be a vampire movie. My number 4 is The Monster Squad. The Monster Squad is a horror comedy, and it's fantastic. It's basically if you took The Goonies and put horror aspects to it. In the film, there's a group of kids that are absolutely obsessed with monsters. They live and breathe monsters, kind of like other people I know. And in the movie, it just so happens that their town gets overrun with monsters because Dracula, a werewolf who you could, I guess, consider to be the Wolfman, a mummy, the creature from the Black Lagoon, and even Frankenstein himself are all resurrected and brought into this town. The main villain, who is Dracula, is seeking this amulet, which basically can control time and space. And in the film, the kids have to group together to try to stop the monsters from getting this amulet and making terrible things happen. Of course, most of the town is unaware that these monsters exist, nor do they believe the kids, so they're basically doing it on their own. There's great effects. There's great comedy in this movie. I mean, the iconic line, I know it doesn't have anything to do with Dracula, but in the film, Wolfman's got nards. I mean, that's one of the greatest lines ever. There's even a whole YouTube channel dedicated and called that. So this movie, it made me laugh growing up. I used to watch it over and over and over. It's such a fun film. They did all of the monsters really well in it, and especially Dracula. He's the most heinous, the most vile of all of the creatures in the movie. So if you've never seen the Monster Squad, I highly recommend checking it out. Not just for the vampire aspect, but it has all of the monsters. Great acting, great one-liners, awesome 80s music and soundtrack. The Monster Squad has always been one of my beloved films in the horror and comedy genre. So Monster Squad, that's my number 4.
Definitely didn't think of that one, but I definitely appreciate that pick. That is an incredible horror comedy. I definitely love that movie. Alright, so my number 3. What is worse than having to deal with vampires? How about having 30 Days of Night? My number 3, 30 Days of Night. I just think, like, this movie is literally almost 100% just perfect. Except for the ending. It literally just derails the movie, kind of ruins it for me, but everything up to that is just sheer terror. I mean, come on. Vampires, one of their main weaknesses is, hey, it's daylight. I can kind of do whatever I want. Nighttime, let me get boarded up. And this one takes place in Alaska. And if you don't know this, Alaska goes through what happens is they basically just have nightfall continuously. The sun doesn't come up, so it's constantly dark. Yeah. And the other thing about this, like, the plot really isn't like the vampires aren't really after anything other than to feast, gorge, kill everyone in this Alaskan town. That's the plot. And it's basically them trying to survive this vampire onslaught. And the way they do the vampires, they're not your traditional, like, proper, or they're not your traditional, like, mutated. They are a little bit, like, in the face. They still kind of look human, but they are so quick, strong, and creepy. And, like, the noises that they make, like, it literally, like, when I think of vampire movies, this is one of the best original takes on a vampire.
It stemmed from a comic, too.
I believe so,
I think
yes.
it did, yeah.
But this is going to be a little bit of a spoiler, but I just kind of have to go over this. So, like I said, this movie completely, like, perfection. And the ending, Josh Hartnett is one of the main actors. Basically, they're running out of options. They've kind of survived for the entire movie, and they find out that if they shoot themselves up with the vampire blood, they'll turn into basically these superhuman, and that's basically how they they basically get through the ending. He shoots himself up, turns himself into a vampire, and epic little fight, and then it ends with him like, I can't live as a vampire, so he like is on his hands and knees with like his girlfriend drama thing, like, and lets the sun come up, and there you go. So I mean, it was like, if they would have done the ending a little bit differently, like if they would have made it that the humans basically prevailed by themselves and didn't have that like adrenaline boost of vampire blood, like it probably would have been a little bit further on my list. But that ending just
yeah, I agree.
is she there, or she leaves and he does that by himself? I can't remember now.
No, she's there.
I thought so.
Yeah. My number 3 is a movie that was only talked about one time on this channel, and that was about 10 seconds ago. My number 3 is also 30 Days of Night. So, we say this all the time, but for those of you, if this happens to be the first time you just glanced onto our channel, John and I do not go over our list with one another. We love to be surprised just as much as you are. So, out of all the vampire movies that are out there, not only, I mean, yeah, it's pretty rare that we would have the same movies on the list, but for it to both be at number 3, and our lists are pre-written, it's written down, so, wow. So, he pretty much covered it. just to add, yes, the effects are amazing, the gore is amazing. Josh Hartnett, the main character in this, you don't see him in a lot of movies anymore. He was in a lot of movies around this time period and before, and I will make the argument that this was probably his best role he's ever had. He acts phenomenally in this movie. Just the way the vampires look and sound, it will chill you to the core. It's great. It's fantastic. It is a highly underrated vampire movie. I would not suggest watching the sequel. The sequel is a completely different story, and in my opinion, it sucks. But this movie was groundbreaking for the vampire genre, and it was definitely going to fall in my top 3. I was stressing where to put it. I knew it was going to be there. If you've never watched 30 Days of Night, both of us obviously couldn't recommend it enough. I won't say much more because he covered it, but it's a great story, a great original vampire story. So yeah, my number 3 is also 30 Days of Night.
I don't know how we get
this isn't the first video this has happened, by the way.
Check the other ones, you'll see how ridiculous it really is. Alright, so my top 3 was really, really hard to kind of figure out where things were going to go. My number 1's not really going to be too much of a surprise if you've watched other videos and kind of got to know me a little bit. But my number 2, I can honestly make an argument to bump it to number 1, but it was just kind of, I couldn't. So my number 2, 1996, Quentin Tarantino, From Dusk Till Dawn. George Clooney, Cheech Marin, and also one of the best cameos and best characters in this movie, small part, happens to be a hometown hero around here, Tom Savini, who also does a lot of the special effects in this. And if you don't know who Tom Savini is, I suggest you crawl out from underneath your rock and realize who has pioneered a lot of the practical effects in a lot of the movies that you love in the horror genre. But basically, you have Harvey Keitel, George Clooney, and you also have, like I said, Quentin Tarantino. George Clooney and Quentin Tarantino's characters are bank robbers, and they just basically did this heist, and their plan is to go to Mexico, hide out in a bar called the Titty Twister until the next night to basically finish out their business. Well, the bar they decided to pick was the wrong bar. Ends up being basically a vampire brothel run by Cheech Marin's character, which has some pretty funny lines. So basically, they're having a good time. They run into this family that happens to be a preacher who is played by Harvey Keitel, and basically they're all just kind of having a good time out of nowhere. Everyone in the bar, well, not everyone, but a lot of the people that work there and stuff, they turn into vampires, and it just turns into a bloody gore fest. It's incredible. I'm a huge Quentin Tarantino fan, and you get a lot of that in this. And once again, it's not really I wouldn't say it's an original twist on vampires, but it has that Tarantino twist to it. And I mean, it has one of my all-time favorite lines in movies in general. And if you've never seen the movie, that line, basically, the preacher is kind of questioning some things, and George Clooney character looks at him, and he goes, "So, which are you? A faithless preacher? Are you a mean motherfucking servant of God?" And basically, at that point, something really epic happens, and it's just an incredible movie. The directing, the atmosphere, the progression, just everything, the effects, and even like the ending. There's really not much wrong about this movie. There's a few kind of cheesy things, but one of the most cheesiest things is one of the most amazing things. I'm just gonna leave your imagination. Imagine placing a 6-shooter gun in a hidden place that only men have, and we'll just leave it at that.
Yes. It was very hard for me not to put this movie on my list. It did not make my top 5. I had it wrote in at 5, and Stakeland I ended up going with in the end. But trust me, I do love this movie. It's so hard when you're limiting it down to 5.
Yeah.
My number 2, there was no way it wasn't going to be number 2, and if it wasn't for one other movie, it would certainly be my number 1. This is a movie that I've watched more times than I can count. It is, in my opinion, just everything that 80s horror is about, other than my number 1 movie, of course. But my number 2 is Fright Night. I love this movie. I love the characters. I love the setting, and I certainly love the story. The story of Fright
I can't
Night.
believe I forgot that one.
You forgot Fright Night. Shame
Wow.
on you. Shame on you, because Fright Night
is incredible.
Is incredible. And it tells the story of Charlie Brewster, average teenager in high school. He has a really nice girlfriend named Amy, best friend named Ed, who he's nicknamed Evil. And they're kind of nerdy, to be honest. And it just so happens that he gets a brand new next door neighbor by the name of Jerry Dandridge, who's considered, kind of an upbeat, good looking, seems like a rich businessman type guy, who Charlie's mom's obviously taken with. And of course, Jerry Dandridge isn't as he seems, as he is actually a vampire. And of course, Charlie is one of the first people to notice this. There are people going missing in the town, and he starts to tell his girlfriend Amy and his best friend Evil, and they don't believe him. And so he also tries to turn to the sort of local actor hero Peter Vincent, vampire slayer, and to try to get help. And that brings in a whole new aspect to the film. And of course, it becomes a fight for survival for Charlie and everyone he cares about once Jerry Dandridge catches on to the fact that he knows he's a vampire. The practical effects in this are absolutely amazing. Tom Holland directed this movie, who has directed a lot of great films. The soundtrack, everything in this movie works to perfection. This, in my opinion, is a perfect vampire movie. And also, one of the reasons why this is perfect is Jerry Dandridge, the main vampire, is played by actor Chris Sarandon, who, in my opinion, this is one of the best vampire performances ever done. From the way he speaks, moves, talks. I mean, some of the most classic lines. Welcome to Fright Night. For real. I mean, it's just such a great movie and a great story. It's weird as it sounds. It's a feel good movie, even though it is dark. And it's one of those movies that as soon as it's over, I can rewatch it again, because it's that good. If you've never watched Fright Night, and if you forgot about it, like this guy, put it in your Blu-ray player or stream it wherever you can get it, because it's that amazing. They did remake it years later. Not nearly as good. Colin Farrell, not even close in the performance of Jerry Dandridge of what Chris Sarandon did. So, once again, Fright Night is my number 2. It's seriously borderline's number 1 because it's that good. There's not much more I can say about it. Fright Night. And I'm mad that he forgot it.
That's crazy. I can't. All right, so it's not going to come to really any shock what my number 1 is. Whatsoever. Like I've said before, if you watch any of the other videos and kind of got to know me, I love classic black and white Universal monster movies. Is that a dead giveaway? Mm-hmm. I think so. My number 1, 1931, Dracula, played by Bela Lugosi. There will never be a better vampire than Bela Lugosi, in my opinion. He is the epitome of your traditional vampire. And I mean, the story, yes, it's loosely based off of a movie that was on my top 5 creepiest movies of all time. That is Nosferatu. That came out in 1922. It's a little bit older than this one. But this is basically a modern, at that time, retelling of Nosferatu. A lot of the stories about is sort of the same. Count Dracula, wants to buy Carfax Abbey, which is in London, and basically he becomes enamored over one of the residents there, Mina, and after he turns her best friend into a vampire, he then bites her and is in the process of turning her into a vampire. Well, her rich father and her fiance enlist the help of a character you probably know because he's basically been in other movies and been readapted, and that's Van Helsing.
Yes.
Comes and he starts to kind of investigate, and he realizes that Dracula is, yes, a vampire, and he basically gears up the fiance and the father in basically a battle of what's to come and to save Mina, which is the woman that Dracula's basically trying to turn. Just I love these old movies because it's not based on gore, effects, action. It's based on good storytelling, acting chops. A lot of people can argue that the acting isn't that great. It kind of has more of a Broadway theatrical type, not so much a musical, but more of like a theater type acting. But I don't get that from it. The atmosphere, what they do in these movies that just grab you without having these huge budgets, these crazy technological like advances, and it's still just a gripping story. And like I said, Bela Lugosi, he does end up becoming basically a horror legend. You see him in some other movies, but 1931's Dracula, that is the epitome of vampire movies to me. And a little fun fact, because 1931, like I said, Nosferatu came out in 1922. It was a silent film about a vampire. 1931, you get Dracula. Some theaters back then still did not have the equipment to play Dracula the way that it was shot with the audio. So there is actually a version you can find that they shot that is still a silent movie.
That's cool.
I recently found that out. I did not know that. I never seen that version, so I really want to find that one and see how like different that is, and how if I still like the movie without basically the dialogue. So
that's cool. Yeah, I mean that's I figured that would be on his list.
Sure I know what yours is.
Yeah, just like Dracula was pretty common. If you know John, that it'd be his number one. My number one is a no-brainer if you know me, and that of course is 1987's The Lost Boys. I know this guy doesn't agree. It's never been one of his favorites, but for me, this is the quintessential vampire movie. It has everything that I love. 80s horror is my favorite genre, or decade, I should say, of horror. So everything from the hairstyles, the clothes, the motorcycles, the songs, everything screams 80s. And it's just such a fun story with such amazing characters, whether you're talking about Corey Haim and Corey Feldman, the characters Sam, Michael, the Frog Brothers, Star, who can forget the crazy guy with the saxophone on the boardwalk playing I Still Believe. I mean, everything in this movie, Kiefer Sutherland is David. It's just an awesome story about two brothers who move with their mother to Santa Clara, California, which happens to be called the murder capital of the world. They move in with their grandfather, and once moving there, they get tied in. Well, Michael, the older brother, gets tied in with a group led by David, played by Kiefer Sutherland, because he becomes obsessed with this girl named Star, and he follows her. She's part of this group. He gets involved with them. Of course, they happen to be a group of vampires. They trick him into drinking the leader David's blood, and of course he starts to slowly turn, and once his brother Sam, played by Corey Haim, finds out, he gets freaked out. He enlists the help of these two brothers that work at a comic store that call themselves the Frog Brothers, played by Corey Feldman, and I forget the other actor's name at the moment, but he enlists the help of them. They consider themselves vampire hunters, even though they've never saw nor fought a vampire in their entire life.
They're just face here.
Yes, they're just a comic book fan, and so together they've got to try to prevent his brother Michael from turning, and of course turning permanently, and they got to try to stop these vampires. And it is just an awesome thrill ride from start to finish. Like I said, awesome characters. What a soundtrack. Songs like People Are Strange, Lost in the Shadows, Cry Little Sister, which is one of, in my opinion, my favorite all-time, score songs in a score. It's just an awesome movie. I really don't understand why this guy, which once again, everyone's opinion to their own, doesn't like it, because it's just from the effects, the one-liners, death by stereo. It's just got such cool moments. The third act of the film, where the vampires come attack them in their home and they have all these traps set up in a Home Alone style way. It's just so fun. There's no way it's not my favorite vampire movie, because I've watched it more than any other vampire movie. And just like I said with Fright Night, I can, as soon as the credits roll, I can restart the film and watch it again. It does have sequels that were made. They were more low budget sequels many years later that only Corey Feldman returns to reprise his role in. They're not very good. I mean, I guess they're worth a watch if you're a huge fan like I am, but the original Lost Boys is really the only one you need to watch. It's an awesome, fun vampire movie, and I can almost guarantee you're not going to hate it. It's just amazing in my opinion. So yeah, my number one, without much surprise, The Lost Boys.
Yeah, I kind of figured that. Like, I don't hate the movie. I just don't hold it to such regards as you do.
Gotcha.
But,
Yep. I mean, that's it's always going to be. It's going to be hard for anything to beat it. But, once again, guys, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed our top 5 vampire film countdown. Please, in the comments, let us know what your top 5 vampire movies are. What do you agree with our list? Do you disagree with our list? And of course, please, as always, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and stay tuned. We have plenty of future content on the way. So thank you for watching Now Showing with
Jon
and Cam. Happy Halloween.